Hello and welcome to Pickles Garage. Today we are working once again on the 1993 Z28 Camero on a particular issue with this specific year being that they don't really sell new exhaust manifolds. Not the same ones just because of the E.G.R system. You can find 94 on pretty easily. You can find 92 earlier pretty easy, but 93 is really difficult to find. For the most part, you just have to go on eBay and buy someone else's junk that doesn't usually work. And so I attempted to fix the issues I had with my own, which I'll show you here in a moment. But ultimately, I couldn't do it. So I'm going to do the upgrade and do the headers for the system. But in doing so, I have to delete the E.G.R system. So I'm going to go in detail how to take off the stock manifolds, how to completely remove the E.G.R system, as well as the block off plates, and ultimately installing the headers that I'm going to get. And I'll show you those when they come in, as well as what you're going to need to do because of that. Just because it's not a direct bolt in some places, and I'll just show you how to do that properly. So let's dive in. So right now we're going to get a little educational. Now the thing is, there's a lot of different information out there as to whether or not you need any of this or whether it's crucial for your system and you should absolutely not touch it. For anyone that has state issues for different legal reasons where you need some of this emission stuff, obviously this is just for educational purposes, or if you decide to take your vehicle racing, because sometimes you can just go through emissions and you don't have to worry about the visual inspection aspect of it, and you might still pass, and sometimes you have to look at it. Or if you're in states where you can have a classic vehicle plate, you don't have to go through emissions, then you can avoid some of this as well. But again, for anyone that has those issues, educational. All that disclaimer aside, really this is two separate things for this year. It's E.G.R as well as their A.I.R system, their AIR system. They do two separate things, and again, it is an endless debate as to whether or not you'll need either of them. The underlying thing that I want to mention is, other than the lack of availability for the 93 specifically, for like a header that has all these connection points, or even a replacement manifold that has this connection points, you don't really have the availability to get it. And so you're kind of stuck in a position of, like, even if I wanted to not have to delete all this stuff, I have to, just because I can't find the replacement for these parts. And again, I'll show you why I was put in this position. But I do want to say that for the most part, none of what I'm about to show you and explain kind of its functionality actually affects performance very much. And so that's why a lot of people argue that you absolutely shouldn't touch any of this stuff, because it doesn't affect performance. So there's no real need to delete it unless you're in a position like I am. So like I said, two separate systems. The A.I.R, the AIR system, I'll just call it AIR system from now on, is actually kind of down here. And you'll see it right there. Kind of looks like its own little alternator almost. And effectively what that is doing is it's taking clean air, right, down in, and it's electronic powered, so it doesn't have a strain on your engine. It's not belt driven. So that's why people say it doesn't affect performance. It only turns on, I believe, when you first start up. And basically what it's doing is it is pumping air into your exhaust, and that is supposed to effectively add air to your exhaust so that your catalytic converter has an easier time and it doesn't put as much strain on that. And so it's giving it kind of fresh air in a nutshell to allow for your catalytic converter to work a little bit better and last a little bit longer. Now, a lot of people delete cats, like this specifically doesn't have a cat on it. And so basically I have something that is pumping fresh air into my exhaust for no reason. Again, it's not putting any strain on my engine. It is adding weight, but other than the fact that it's extremely clunky and it's in the way and it looks really ugly, it's not actually affecting me, but it's not actually doing anything. So the position I'm in to delete it, it makes a lot of sense. The other thing is the E.G.R system, which is going to be a little bit more related to the back of the engine. Not really going to get a good visual on it until I start taking things apart. But what that is effectively doing is arguably a little bit more important. It is putting exhaust back into the back of the intake. And so that way it kind of helps regulate the temperature of your combustion chamber. And so people go to the extreme of saying that, you know, you're not going to have the detonation that you would because it's cycling kind of that hotter air back into the intake and it regulates temperatures. It's kind of like running a little bit more rich. And so they say, obviously, that's really important because if you remove it, all of a sudden, you know, you could damage your engine or you're driving it around, like it's not going to run properly without like a really good tune. A lot of other people argue that that's not really the case. That's not true. Vehicle runs just fine. It's going to run a lot better if you get a tune, but it runs fine without the extremes of saying that it's going to detonate by any means. The reason why the 93 is unique is because it relied on this system, and you know it's got all these specialty parts for this system, but then 94 on they just used a wider duration cam and effectively eliminated the need for all of this stuff. So that's why you can't really find the parts because it's only 1 year specific, which is why, you know, you're supposed to avoid the first year of things. So all that in a nutshell, if you delete all these things and you put headers on it and you don't have a cat, then really you're going to be in, you know, good shape if you have a decent tune or you get a wider duration cam, which you can find a lot of that information online. So a lot of information thrown at you, but ultimately I feel safe with the fact that I don't have a cam to go ahead and delete all, or sorry, that I don't have a catalytic converter to go ahead and delete all this stuff and show you step by step. So let's dive into it. So here's my dilemma. I basically wanted to drop the oil pan on it, and I had to drop the exhaust, and just trying to take off the nuts on the bottom of this. This is from the passenger side, and they broke off. And so I told myself, all right, well, I will just remove it and go ahead and get specialty tools to take these out. And then I could just put regular bolts back into it. But every possible step of the way, this thing fought me. Even with the specialty tools, the bolts just broke further because they are completely glued in here. I would probably have to heat it up to try and melt it, but I couldn't even get the O2 sensor out. That's fused into it. Tried a bunch of specialty tools, broke it further, still can't get it out. I couldn't get the top of the air system connection pipe here off. That's fused in, so I had to cut the pipe that I was going to repair if I was putting back in the system. But basically this thing is just one big pile of junk. Car came from up north and everything is just completely unusable. And so again, I'm put in the position of I need to replace this part, can't replace the part. No one seems to sell these new anymore. Everyone else's that I was looking for online, like eBay selling them, looked exactly in the same condition. So I just buy someone else's junk, and I would still have to try and figure out how to replace this part as well. So my hand is forced. I have to go with the headers. You can do a couple different things. I'll show you the exact one I get. Like I said, I ordered it. It's on the way. There's also long tube headers that you can get that seem to work just fine, but it's a lot more involved of a process. But like I said, unfortunately, my hand is forced. I do think removing the air system because I don't have the catalytic converter isn't really going to change anything for me. I do think the E.G.R system is something to be a little bit more concerned about. A lot of people debate whether you have to do anything. Plenty of people say that you do have to tune out the codes because you might get an error code. I haven't gotten an error code, even though my air system is basically, it's connected but not doing anything. So I guess it probably wouldn't throw the code until I disconnect it. E.G.R code, that's also going to be annoying, but you can tune both of those out, and then you could potentially tune to make sure that your engine doesn't run you know, with as many issues as people are warning of, or you can get a cam. Eventually I might get a cam for this, but for now I'm going to show you everything without having to replace the cam, but just replacing the pipes and what I do for that. So let's go ahead and dive into the exact removal of the driver's side, and then I'll walk you through the removal of this one on the passenger side. So we're starting on the driver's side just because we're going to need some more imagination for that side, just because I've already removed it. So it's going to be easier if you have this visual first, but this will slide straight back. It's got a clamp here that you can remove. And this, if you want to remove it here, if yours isn't fused like mine, is a size 22. you're going to want as much surface connecting to it as possible. So if you get like an open-ended wrench, you're going to want that rather than the 2 point of contact. So keep that in mind. These bolts down here are on either side of the exhaust outlet, right? And they're going to be size 14 millimeter. If you get a long ratchet, it's going to make the job a lot easier. Just make sure you go slow, nice and easy, just because you definitely don't want to break those off. So those are the bolts we're focusing on here, but I'm going to go ahead and remove the bottom first, which is down here. And I will get you a visual of that and show you those sizes as well. So from underneath on the driver's side, we get a decent visual of our air pump system. And so we'll be coming back to that. But further back, we can follow our exhaust pipe. Now, most of my bolts are not original because they broke off when I removed this side. But you're going to have three, one there, and then one back here in the dark a little bit. But that should be the original size, and that is 9/16. So we're going to go ahead and remove those three, and then this pipe will fall down a little bit. Not a lot, but just drop down out of the way. All right, so roughly that length will get it done for you just to get the three off. If you have swivel, that can kind of help for a wobble extension where it doesn't fully seat, then that should do fine as well. 12-point socket also helps, but we'll go back to the top now that we have these three removed. All right, so for the most part, the deep socket actually works best just because it's not so long as this would be with like an extension, but it still gives you that extra length. Again, size 14. The front one just kind of works better with the shorty, but we'll go ahead and remove that one first. Again, long ratchet is going to be a lifesaver. If you feel it getting really stuck, I would switch to a breaker bar just to not break your ratchet, but definitely be careful with these ones. Let's start removing them. Okay, so we officially have it all out, which is great. Like I said, pull straight up, not an issue. This one, as I mentioned, if you have just a regular size socket, it's probably going to work best, but essentially everything else, I just used the long one. Now, what I will say is you're going to want to keep this third one in. That'll be your last one because you definitely don't want it to start flopping around while you have these back ones that you're working on. So leave this third one in because it's really easy to get to. And then this one, like I said, works best with the long extension. You can see where my ratchet was kind of scraping against, so it does cut close, but it should work just fine with this setup. This one was probably the hardest to get to just because the shield kind of came up just what feels like millimeters more, but obviously if I'm scraping here, that's going to be an issue here. And so I was able to get to it with the long extension, and I was able to get to this back one with the long extension, but I actually came up from underneath, and I'll show you what that vantage point looks like. So we're back under by where the oil filter is and where your exhaust is, but if you look up just past that spark plug, you can see that you'd be able to see those two bolts right there in the back, and that was the easiest for me. The long ratchet down up through this direction and grabbing that first and second one. The very most rear you can see from the top, and so it makes it look like it should be easy to get from the top, but I still found it way easier to loosen it from up underneath. So that would be my recommendation for those, but like I said, pulled straight up. So it is a little funny going back over this just because this took me about 20 minutes and this side took me about a week and a half. So you might not have the same issues that I had on this one, which will make it a lot faster, but I will go over everything you need to do to make it a lot easier on yourself. So as you remember, I mentioned that I wasn't able to get the size 22 pipe off here. So if you're able to remove that, that would be step one. Go ahead and get that removed. If not, my original plan was I got a pipe cutter, and then I was going to sleeve it and try and make as good of a seal as I possibly could. If you have to do that, then that was the direction I was going with that one. But instead, I cut it. So if you don't have that issue, go ahead and remove this. Underside, same thing as the other one, except that these are nuts. And so hopefully yours don't break off like mine. And then you'll also notice that you have an O2 sensor on this side that the other one you didn't have to deal with. There are especially O2 sensor tools that kind of go around and then remove, but I believe this is also a size 22. You can also, if yours is stuck, just unplug it. It just has a very basic clip that unclips and then it slides off. And so you could technically leave your O2 sensor plugged in and then just undo the clip and then it'll work as well. Now, these are size 14. I'll go over more detail on the ends here, but for the most part, these are pretty much exactly that sort of long size 14 that you're going to be able to go ahead and remove. Like I mentioned, leave one in towards the center just to hold it while you're working on the end ones. But that should be it for that. So let me go over what you need to remove before you take any of these bolts off. And like I said, I'll go into more detail on these end pieces. So now that you have the top connection, the bottom connections, and your O2 sensor disconnected, the next thing you're going to want to remove is your dipstick. Now, I tried to work around it, was not worth it. Ultimately, it had to go anyways. So go ahead and get that removed. There's just a bolt about halfway down because it's going to be in the vehicle like that. And that is just a little guy like that, and it is a 3/8. So you can use something like this. Go ahead and grab that, pull it straight out, and get that out of the way before you do anything else. So that's taken care of. We're going to move on to the next step. Next item that you might notice is missing is the alternator. So how do we take that off? Well, if you haven't already, go ahead and disconnect the negative side of the battery, and then we're going to remove the belt from the alternator, and we do that down below. So with a breaker bar and a 5/8 socket, basically you just put it on the nut here on this pulley, and you're just going to tighten it, which relieves tension, and then you can pull the belt off. Now, one thing to keep in mind is don't start it with the actual breaker bar up here, because when you remove the tension, this will go up way higher than it is with the belt. So try and get it started down here, so that way when it walks itself back up, you're not coming way up here. But once you remove that tension, like I said, go ahead and pull the belt off. So the alternator itself is going to have a few different bolts. All of these are size half, right? So one right here will go through this top section. The one on the back, which is still in it right here, that goes through this arm, and then down below goes through this. And then this back nut is a 5/8, so you can either put a socket on it or you could put a wrench of sorts. So that will remove these three. There is going to be a plug in the rear right down here. Looks like this. All you have to do, pull this clip back a little bit, it slides right out. And then this will have your power, which is right here. And that will be connected to the back as well, right at this point. And that will be a size 9/32. So once you removed this back, this clip, this, and then there's one more that's here that connects to this bolt right here. So I'll show you that here in a second. So naturally, size 10 makes an appearance, and that is going to be this bolt right here connected to this arm, which is connected to the first exhaust bolt. So it'll have its own nut in the middle here that actually plugs it into the block, and then there will be the nut on top that secures this bar. But that is the only specialty thing on that exhaust bolt. Everything else, as I mentioned, size 14, you're just going to work your way back, leave the middle one just so that you have some stability while you're working on the other ones. And then for the final one that's a little strange is, I don't know if this is stock, so I won't go too much into it, but mine just had a post here, and it did not have a nut on it whatsoever. It was just a regular kind of post. And so that made removal a little challenging. If you have a bolt back there, that would be the best thing, is just removing that. But I'll go into detail on what I had to do just in case this is stock. If it's not, you can ignore the next 2 minutes. So the biggest thing for me was getting the alternator out of the way and getting the dipstick out of the way. So the dipstick was naturally on the outside, and so as I was trying to pull the manifold now freed out of the way, it had sort of a springiness while it was holding with the dipstick, and I needed to move it forward straight in order to get it out, and so that's why the alternator needed to be removed. So if you've already removed the dipstick and have already removed the alternator, realistically, it should come nice and smooth on its way out. However, if you have this post, then what it does is it grabs it naturally. And so you have to pull it far enough this way in order to get it past the post. And then you're going to need to be able to dip it and then sort of rock it up. And that's essentially what I had to do. Now, because of the post and because I had the dipstick in initially, it fought me the entire way. And I essentially had to use this, a giant crowbar, in order to get enough of it pulled out of the way. And so basically I had it against the block gently, within reason, hackery within reason, with intent. But I was able to get it pulled past the post, and then it was resting on it, and then I was able to push it back down until the post pushed past the actual plate. Then it relieved all the tension, and I was able to pull it straight up. So if you don't have the post, then you should be able to pull it up without any way I just described. If you have the post, basically you just need to get it pushed away and then off the post, and then you need to rock it and pull it up this direction with the alternator out of the way. It shouldn't be too hard. So that is essentially the removal of your old manifolds for both of them. So now let's get into the more specific stuff, which is related to the air system and the EGR, plating that off, and then we will show the new exhaust headers. So let's dive into the rest of this. All right, so we'll start with the air system. We are back on the driver's side, and really all you have to do is follow the pipes to find it down here. You'll notice that you have connected here, goes down underneath, and you have another one connected up here. So we'll start disconnecting that. There's really not a whole lot keeping it in place. There's kind of a bracket that has its own bolts, and then there's separate bolts that actually hold it to the vehicle itself. So naturally, most of this is going away, and you don't really have to ever think about it again. But when you look at inlets like this going into your air intake, just know that you are going to have to cap off some of this stuff. So let's go ahead and disconnect that. We'll get a cap for it here in a little bit, and then we'll go underneath to remove that. So up underneath on the driver's side, so like I said, the two hoses now disconnected at the top, which you can see. And then there is the bolts on this side. I see 3 right now. And then there's also bolts on the front, but that's just holding it to this bracket. So we're just going to remove the entire thing rather than removing it from the bracket itself. You'll also notice there's a clip on this side. So let me go ahead and get a better angle for you to see that undoing. So definitely easier with 2 hands, but basically this just lifts up, and then this will pull straight back. So let me try and do that. Otherwise, you'll have to take my word for it. There you go. So disconnected. So that should now have like check engine light, because it's going to sense that it's not there anymore. But like I said, we'll get that tuned out. And then we'll go ahead and remove these. These are size 10, so I should have enough room, but if I don't, I'll let you know. But essentially, we're just using size 10 to remove these 3, and then we will remove the rest of it. And there you go, came straight out. So I had to do the front ones on this, and there was only 2, also size 10, just because this bolt was fighting me. These 2 came out nice and easy, and this one ultimately broke off. And so theme with this vehicle for sure are these terrible, terrible bolts that just break, but nothing major, slid right out. So that is the removal of the air system, and now we're going to focus on the a little bit more complicated E.G.R system. But other than plugging the air intake and finishing removing the rest of the components on the back end, it's pretty easy. And it's not super invasive. So that is removed. Let's move on to the next stuff. All right, so I was able to actually get that bolt out with this stud extractor tool here. I actually have a review on this out already, but it works pretty well. Even in my review, I was working on like a broken bolt that ultimately this didn't work for, but I think for, basically just the case where you can't get a good grip on it, this tool is perfect. So worked like a dream. So we're moving on to the next thing. So really now all we're focused on is now we have a series of leaks, right? And so we're just following tubing back here and removing the next parts and where it connects to the back of the intake. And then once we do that, then we'll focus on putting the new headers on, which I will show you where I got them and how much they were. So let's go ahead and start taking off a couple more pieces back here. All right, so I pulled the pipe off this side, right? So I just need to break that up a little bit more, but let's focus back on this side. If you still have your pipe connected, it might be a little bit harder to maneuver. But if you go straight back here, you'll see where it's connected to the intake. So we just need to remove those right now. And then once you remove them, there's this, which is an LT1 block off plate. That's the code here. You can get it on Speedway. And so we're going to cover that opening with this one, because as you can see, the way the shape was, that'll just go right there. And once again, you get your emissions warning because, again, this is for race, off-road, pre-1966, or entertainment purposes. But that is the part that you can get. And like I said, you can find it on Speedway, about 25 bucks. So let me get the sizes for that one pipe. We'll get that removed. We'll get this in its place. All right, sorry for the flicker, but I have a better angle here, so you can actually see it from the side. So we're just going to knock out those two real quick. And then there you go, the whole assembly comes out. So honestly, these, as terrible of an angle as it is to get to, they're held on with like hopes and dreams, because basically the moment I got it this much turned, it was loose to the touch. So essentially what I used is this, and I essentially had it at kind of like this angle. So I came at it from the rear. I had this bent back like that, and like I said, once I was able to get that much of a turn on it, I was able to finger loosen it, and I was able to come about it with both angles. So you might get more creative with other things, but I always recommend a ratchet like this. And essentially, like I said, deep socket, half-inch size socket, deep, and then I basically just had this angle. I was able to come about it from the rear and grab it like that. Just be careful, because there's a lot of different vacuum lines. You don't want to break any of those. They're a pain to find and a pain to replace. But like I said, the whole thing came out. So now we're just going to go ahead and get our blocking plate. I'll probably put some gasket on it just so that there's a better seal. And then we will move on to the next step. So as with anything custom, it's not always going to be a perfect fit. So it gets on the actual studs, but then it stops the moment it gets to the point where there's threads. So I just need to open up these a tiny amount. So I'm going to go ahead and drill those out real quick, just so they're a little wider, and then I'll go ahead and throw this on. Okay, so now we have them nice and snug. I used a 5/16 drill bit to open up the holes a little bit. I ended up not doing any gasket just because I don't want it to flake off and fly into my intake. I'm just going to do a nice good seal here. But we're going to go ahead and move on to the headers. So I'll show you exactly the ones I got and the price right now. All right, bad news bears, the hookers don't work. You can't use the hookers. I wanted to use the hookers. I like the hookers, but it just would not, under any circumstances, anything I fiddled with, go into place. And so, unfortunately, I bought these forever ago. The earlier part of the video was probably a good 4 months ago at this point. But I have like 5 minutes of footage where I'm working through different issues, working through some solves, giving advice. And I went back and forth if I wanted to kind of lead you guys into like, oh, this is what I tried to do with this to really disqualify it from working. But I don't want to waste you guys' time. I don't want to take away from what you probably are going to do on your own. But just know, if you see these hookers online, unfortunately for this specific application with my 93 Camaro, with my LT1, it just didn't work. And I'll go over extremely briefly all the reasons why it didn't work, so that way you can kind of see that I went through a lot of details. I just don't want to add 5 minutes to this video for me to lead you down the wrong direction before I go to what I actually do. So this is the product that I actually bought that I'll show you right now. So here it is in the flesh. Like I said, speed engineering. This is going to be the biggest win. I'll go through why the hookers don't work, and this is going to be a big part of it. But I do want to relay some information. I'm sure Speed would want me to, that this is a off-road racing product only. They sent this giant red card. They also made me sign something when I bought it, and they sent a smaller one in the box. So they are very adamant to let people know that this is for race use only. So if you see me in the future driving this vehicle on the road, just know it's because I magically found an exhaust manifold or header that actually works and is legal. So keep that in mind. But we will go ahead and go over real briefly the issues with the hookers, and then I'll show you the installation on this. Alright, so you'll note that I took the spark plugs out. That just made it a little easier, and I didn't want to break any of them off. So you'll see the hooker that doesn't work is currently lined up, semi-bolted in. So this all looks fine. You know, everything works. It's sitting against the block just fine. There was a bracket that I had to have the like the actual lead wires that hold against the block. I had to remove those because the header itself was sort of interfering with it, and so I did remove that. I think it was like 3/8 or so, and then I was able to get the header in place. But the issue is, the reason why I was saying the front of that other one was so valuable is because there should be my steering shaft, which is this thing right here. That should be right there, and that comes down, and let me see if I can get some light here. That's supposed to come down here, and it ends up hitting the front of this header. Now I'll show you a picture here real briefly. So naturally that isn't going to work if it's brushing up against the header. So what I was intending on doing was I was going to kind of get some sort of jerry-rigged multiple knuckle thing to angle it back under this, but it's just not worth it. So I do think the other one with that lead pipe going up rather than down is going to give me the space I need. Now you might still have to remove the plastic elbow. You might not be able to use that, but you won't have to worry about the dampener running into the new header with the one that we currently have. So removing this is pretty easy. You just have to undo this, which pinches it, and then undo this side, and then it just slides off the snout there. So I would recommend removing this just for our new one to go ahead and get removed. I'll get this hooker out of here, which it doesn't work anyways. The other side that didn't work is this one right here. So obviously there isn't that steering shaft that you have to worry about anymore, but you'll see this is all rubbed down, and the reason is because this kind of has like a nub right here. It's sort of at an angle up, and it was running into the other side header, and so I would have had to grind this down in order to get it to fit snugly. The other thing is the bolt was going to rub right against that firewall. I wasn't going to be able to go into that. And then the last thing is I don't have my AC compressor anymore, but if this was in the proper position, or if you had the compressor here, then you would have to probably grind down this top part because that was also hitting it. So in a nutshell, it doesn't work on either side. You'd have to do crazy fabrication. You'd have to do some crazy steering shaft on that side. So ultimately, just not worth it. So we're going to go ahead and give the new one a go. I will say, because it's a long tube, I'm not going to be able to use that factory Y right here, so I am probably going to have to go ahead and cut that back. I do have a really good exhaust guy. If you're doing your own exhaust, just keep in mind that you're going to have to do some welding. But for me, I'm just going to go ahead and cut it, and then I'll drive to my exhaust guy when I'm done. So let's go ahead and start diving in. Okay, so my Y pipe is cut out now, so I have a straight shot back here. This looks like plenty of room. I'm going to go ahead and test fit on the driver's side. I will say that this side looks pretty tight, and so I could see needing to maybe take off the valve covers or even hoist the engine ever so slightly. And if I had to do that, then I might do this side first and then that side second. But I at least want to see if, with everything where it's supposed to be, if it slides straight in. So let's go ahead and test that out first. Okay, so here's how we're looking so far. You can see it's almost in, but this is where I believe the valve cover will give me that last bit of clearance. I did break off my oil pressure sender, which is right down there. You can find them pretty easily on Rock Auto, so it's not the end of the world. But just another thing to worry about when putting in your headers, but you'll see it'll be jutting out, and I thought I can get under it, but I just ended up breaking it off. So I'm gonna pull this back out. It slides in pretty easily. Like I said, you're definitely gonna have to remove that steering shaft just to make it a little bit easier, and then I'm gonna go ahead and remove the valve cover and hope that that gives me enough clearance to get the rest of the way. But it is, as you can see, just barely not clearing. I was also running into that down there, and that's what it was resting on the most, and that's when the oil pressure sender ended up breaking off as I was trying to slide it past that. So I don't think you'll be able to get around that without removing the oil pressure sensor, but now that it's broken off, it's out of the way, and we just have this last bit to worry about, and hopefully that gets us where we need to be. Alright, so chugging along, once the valve cover was gone, I did split it a little bit when I was trying to rub past it, so maybe just go ahead and completely take off the gasket when you're sliding it in as well. But so far, it's sort of working. This doesn't, the one that came with it, doesn't have the slots in the first and last one, so that was kind of annoying. So I had to make sure this was in place before I started threading any of these, but just doing the zipper technique, get this first one that's easiest access, and then do the next one, the next one, the next one, the next one. Leave them pretty loose just because some of them have a tight bend, so it's a little hard to try and do this one last, for example, if it's all snugged up. But we're just working our way down, and then if you run into a situation where you're trying to do something in the back, go ahead and put a little duct tape around the, come on, focus, around the bolt in the socket, just loosely, so that way once it's tight enough you can just break it off. But I always found that kind of was helpful. If you don't have a spare set of hands, you can also just kind of put some blocks down there. I just have a jack stand, some wood under it, just holding up the tail. But I'm pretty confident that I can go ahead and get this one fully installed, because I test fit this side and I just barely couldn't get past that hump right there. And so I feel like the valve cover being removed on that side might give me enough room. People were saying that they had to lift the engine, so I'm going to see what I can do about not doing it. Famous final words, I'm sure. I'll have to do exactly what they did, but like I said, I'm going to give it a swing. But originally I wasn't going to put this one at all just because I thought I really had to lift the engine, but it looks like maybe like that much room I need to come up with. So I think I should be okay to fully install this one. So I'm going to finish this, put the valve cover back on, and then we'll go to the other side. Okay, so here's where we're at. I got the valve cover back on. This is fully snugged up. I do want to show you where my potential issues are on this side, and it helps describe what I'm doing on the next side. So as you can see, come straight back. You know, as we know, we're going to have to get some welding done to do the downpipe and everything, but you can see it's a hair too long where it's going to run into this bar here. And so odds are what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to get it cut around back here, and then I'm going to have to kind of do an angle down just to get it back over that direction. But right now it's just about to hit this bar, so the snout is a little too long. Now the O2 sensor itself, I'm touching it right here, it's between these two fingers, so plenty of extra room to get this cut back and just make it more convenient. But again, the reason I wanted to bring it up is because on the other side, I didn't really have an issue where I mentioned that I would have to lift the engine. I really don't think at this stage it would actually improve anything. Removing the valve cover, I was able to basically, this pipe right here, I wanted to go inside. So without the alternator in here, once I was able to get this pipe down and under this hump, then the rest of it just flowed smoothly back. So you can see it's practically installed, but what I'm running into is similar to what I had on the other side, which is, it's going to be hard for me to sort of, I'm going to point it out. So there's a hump right here, right? And it's the exact same on both sides. And the underside of our header is hitting that bump, and that bump is pushing the tail up, and that tail is then hitting the bottom of our floor here. And so don't have to lift the engine. If I lift the engine, it's not going to change any of my situation. That's not where my binding is. That's not where my rub is. My rub is literally that bump right there, and then that is forcing the tail up. And so the reason I wanted to bring the other side up before I mentioned this side is because I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to shorten the tail just a few inches. So I believe if I can shorten the tail a couple inches back, then I'll be able to go a little deeper past the hump, and then I'll get through anyways. And then naturally I'm going to have to connect my downpipe anyways. So I'll still have plenty of room for the O2 sensor, but I wanted to bring that up just because naturally people are saying, oh, you have to lift the engine or whatever. But again, once the valve cover was off, that was not my issue. Not having the alternator here and having the valve cover off gave me all the clearance I needed to get down in, but I'm not able to swoop up. That's my issue right now. And so because I have to cut the other side anyways, I'm not really worried about cutting this side, and I have plenty of room for the bung. So if you're watching Speed Engineering, your tail is a little too long. So, you know, if you want to get this installed without having to do anything too major to it, then I think if the tail is a little shorter, or maybe the pipes came up a little bit more snug, then we could clear that bump. But I'm gonna, like I said, probably clip that tail. I'll do some measurements real fast just to make sure this is a good idea, and I'll show you if/when it works. So here we go. This is all I took off, just about 1.5 inches. Used the Milwaukee torch and Ryobi, but I ran into a new problem, so let me show you that. So now I have the clearance to get a little bit more creative. You can see where it was scuffing and denting before I cut it, so now I have a lot more room, a lot more clearance to move around. I have it shifted over, which is great. It's still hitting this right here, and now I have it angled. I have plenty of room up top to wiggle it all around as I need, but it's just hitting the solenoid right here on my starter. So starters are pretty easy to move, so I'm going to go ahead and undo that bolt there, and then try and hang it down, maybe hold it with one hand, get this slid past, and then put it right back, or maybe even just loosen it and get it wiggly enough to get it out of the way. But as you can see, it's just barely touching that bump there. It just needs to slide past there. I would almost grease it if I didn't think it would just dent it. But yeah, now it's coming into contact with that solenoid. Like I said, I still, after looking at all this, I still don't think lifting the engine solves these problems, but you know, you might see something different with yours. But so far, I think if I just get this starter right here loose, then I should be able to get it slid the rest of the way. So let me do that now. So these are just going to be size 10. There's going to be 4 of them by the pan, and then towards the top up there on both sides. And then this is going to be 9/16 or similar, 1 and 2. And like I said, I'm just going to cup it in my hand, drop down a little bit. I'm not going to disconnect the wires. I'm going to try and multitask and slip this down, and then I'll put the starter back in place. Alright, so I'm going to show you this stage because this is going to make or break the install here. So you'll see I'm kind of perched right after these 2 lifters right there. And then you'll see I'm actually all the way down, pointed at the ground and resting. Now the reason I'm doing that is I have all this room, not that the starter's out of the way, so I can stab it this way and then slide it this direction. And the reason for that is because of that lip right there on the actual block. And so the idea is to stab it that direction, get all the way to the ground, push it this way so that we start to get around that metal lip. Now I'm going to go up underneath, and I'm going to try and get this bar right here up and around to rest on top. And I believe once I get that rested on top, that'll allow me to push this side this direction, which will pull this side this direction, and then we should be good to do the install. But again, I think the starter removal is the big key. So I would do that before I even take the valve covers off. So starter, disconnect it completely, get it out of your way, take off the valve covers, stab down this direction, move this way, and then come around. So let me get that last bit flicked over. And there we go. So we're more or less in place. Obviously I still have to lift it to get it to where it's actually going to go, but if it's horizontal right now, that means we're basically there. So what I had to do is I had to go really deep. Like I actually lifted the car up slightly more. So that way I had about, let's see, that's about like a foot and maybe 4 inches off the ground. And then again, remember I did cut mine, so if you're not going to cut yours, you might be able to still get away with it, but I had to go really deep to get basically all of it past the end of that housing right there for the transmission. And then once I was able to get past that, I could get that pipe around it, and then everything leveled out again. So we are good. I'm just going to lift this into place, start threading in, and then I'll let you know if I run into any other hiccups. But like I said, before you even start, I would say remove your starter, remove the valve cover, but I 100% did not have to lift my engine to do this. So I think this is the better route of just removing that starter, removing the valve cover, going really deep. You could almost, if you had a lift or if you want to go really high, you could almost come up from the underneath. That's what I have to do with my 79, but I think this still ended up working. Just have to go deep, come back up, and you should be good. So like I said, I'll start buttoning up and let you know. We are in place. So honestly, the hardest one was the rearmost one, just because a little bit of a bend in the pipe makes it so that you have to kind of get that one started first. So I did do 1, 2, 3 a little bit, just so it kind of held in place. And then I went from underneath, laying on my back, I reached up and I was able to get that one started, and then more or less get that one most of the way, and then start zippering this direction rather than the other direction, the other side. But no real hiccups, clears everything else. So good job, Speed Engineering, for that. Definitely not the end of the world. I got my valve cover back on. I got my spark plugs back in, which again I removed just so I didn't chip them when I was trying to put it deep. But basically, you know, we're pretty much good to go. I just have to put my starter back on, which I'm not going to go through again. You just have to do those 2 bolts like I had mentioned, reconnect your negative and your power to the back of that, put on that scatter plate cover underneath, and then you're pretty much done underneath. And then you're going to replace your alternator. You know, it's just the bolts that you had removed. You're just going to replace, replug in. If you broke anything along the way, like I did, my temp sensor I'm going to have to replace, as well as my oil pressure sensor. But everything should be fine on that. So I'm going to wrap here, just because I know this is a long video. Had a lot of things that I covered, obviously the E.G.R. delete and the A.I.R delete, and then getting these headers. But can confirm officially, this is a product that you could buy for your 93 Camaro or similar, and it does work. I just went through it. It's possible. I didn't do anything gimmicky. This is functional. This is possible. So feel free to reach out and buy that product. If you have any questions, you can let me know, and I'll try and help you best I can. But thank you very much for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe. See you on the next one.